Assalamualaikum and a very good day. Today we are going to look at listening, listen for specific information, and distinguishing relevant and irrelevant information in familiar contexts and on unfamiliar topics. We are going to look at listen for specific information. First, there are situations in real life where we listen only for some specific details and ignore the rest of the entire message. Example, weather forecast, announcement in trains, station or airport. Once we have learned to pick up the main idea in a lecture, your next step is to note the specific details. You will need this detail later to answer questions on all types of exam, such as multiple choice, short answer, and essay. To listen for note-specific detail, it is helpful to notice how the lecture is organized. If the lecture is organized in the standard way, such as it contains an introduction, body and conclusion, listen for and note the main idea in each of these sections. The following information will help you to decide which specific details you should write in your notes. If the lecture is organized in the standard way, if it contains an introduction, body and conclusion, listen for and note the main idea in each of the sections. The following information help you decide which specific details you should write in your notes. If the introduction to the lecture is a summary of the previous class session, take note of this. These notes will be added reminder of what the lecturer thinks it is important. If the introduction is just a general introduction or an attention gesture, such as a fact, a saying, or a story, you don't need to write it down. Next, listen for information in the body of the lecture. You will probably hear the most detail in this section. Write down as much information as you can in your notes, but don't worry if you can't get everything. Put a question mark in the margin and ask questions later. As you listen to the conclusion, continue to make your notes as complete as possible. Most conclusions won't contain any new information, but be ready in case the instructor has forgotten to include the important detail earlier and decide to mention it in the conclusion. There are 4 ways to organize your notes. The first one, this method of note-taking is useful when the main point and details are long phrases and sentences, such as below. Second, the method of note-taking is most useful when details are simple, statistic, single word, or very short phrases. Next, the following method is useful when the lecturer tends to back up and give specific details on points mentioned earlier in the lecture. Next, the following method is useful when the lecturer tends to back up and give specific details on points mentioned early, such as in the previous. Lastly, this method is useful when details recap the main point. Now, let's look at a video on listening for specific information.
Welcome. Today we are going to situation like background noise and maybe lack of visual clue or limited vocabulary and maybe lack of knowledge of the topic and inability to distinguish individual sounds. To overcome these difficulties, we need some skills. So, shall we try together to achieve the listening skill? The first one is predicting content. Before listening a lecture or a news report or a conversation, you can try to predict what you are going to hear. When you are trying to predict the topic of a talk or a conversation, all the related vocabulary stored in your brains will be activated to help you to understand the context, what you are listening to. Depending on the context, you can often predict the kind of words and style of language the speaker will be using. For example, imagine you have just turned on your TV. You see a man in a suit standing in front of a large map with the symbols of a sun, clouds, and thunder. What do you imagine he is about to tell you? Most likely, this is going to be a weather forecast. You can expect to hear words like sunny, windy, and overcast. You will probably hear the use of future tense like it will be a cold start to the day and there will be a showers in the afternoon, etc. I would like to give an exercise for you to practice predicting content. Watch or listen to a recorded TV program or clip from YouTube. Pause after every few sentences and try to predict what is going to happen or what the speaker might say next. Try it now. Okay? The second one is listening for gist. The gist is defined as the most important pieces of information about something or general information without details. Listening for gist is when you try to understand what is happening even if you can't understand every phrase or sentence. For example, words like food, friends, fun, park, and sunny day have their own meanings, right? But when you hear the same words in sequence, they help you to understand the context. Can you guess the context here? Food, fun, friends, park, and sunny day. Here the context may be about a picnic, right? Like that, you have to practice. I'll give you a task to practice listening for gist. Find a short video with subtitles on a topic that you are interested. Use the subtitle to predict the content and then listen to the content words. Go back and listen again with the subtitles. How much did you understand the first time? Return to the video a week later and try again. Third one is listening for details. Here you have to narrow down your search to get the details you needed. So you are listening for a special purpose, or you are narrowing down your search to get the details you needed. For example, in a listening test, if you are asked to write down the age of a person, listen for the words related to age or a number that could represent that person's age. If it is a conversation, you might wait to hear someone beginning a question with "How old?" That is listening for details. Do the following tasks to practice listening for details. Decide on a type of detailed information you want to practice listening for details, and to watch programs where you would expect it to get that information. For example, you could listen to a weather report to get details about weather, or you could follow the sports news to find out the latest results. The fourth one is inferring meaning. Inferring meaning is using clues and prior knowledge about a situation to work out the meaning of what you hear. For example, imagine you are a tourist in a country and you don't know to speak their language. And now you are in a restaurant. You try to pay the bill using a credit card. But the server seems to say something apologetic in response. Even though you don't understand his words. Because you don't know their language, right? You don't know to speak their language. So you didn't understand what he is saying or what he said. And even though you didn't understand his words, you can probably conclude that the restaurant does not take credit cards and you need to pay with cash instead. Similarly, you can infer the relationship between people from the words they use without having to find out directly. Shall we try one conversation to infer the relationship between people? Listen to the situation and guess. Tom, did you do your homework? I did, sir. But the dog ate it. That's a terrible excuse. You will never pass your exam if you don't work hard. Here, from this conversation, we can conclude as this conversation is between a student and his teacher. How we can come to this conclusion? From the words homework and exam. So from these two words, we can reach the conclusion that this conversation is between a teacher and a student. Hope you got an idea and you can practice well. Thank you.
Next, distinguishing relevant and irrelevant information in familiar context and on unfamiliar topic. Now, let's watch a video on distinguishing relevant and irrelevant information in familiar context and on unfamiliar topics.
Distinguish between relevant and irrelevant evidence. Relevant evidence actually proves what your claim says. Sometimes authors will throw in evidence that is not so relevant or irrelevant to the claim they're trying to make. It's your job to notice when they do this. For instance, let's say an author claims that Steph Curry is the greatest shooter in professional basketball. Let's try to figure out which pieces of evidence are relevant to this claim and which are irrelevant. The first piece of evidence says, Curry is well liked by his teammates and coaches and shows excellent sportsmanship. This piece of evidence does talk about Steph Curry, and it does show a positive trait of his, but it does not show that he is the greatest shooter in professional basketball. In fact, it doesn't have to do with his shooting at all. This piece of evidence is irrelevant. The next piece of evidence says, Steph Curry's stellar performance on the college basketball court earned him the attention of the National Basketball Association. This one is a little bit closer. Again, it does talk about Steph Curry, and at least it talks about his basketball skills. It says that the NBA, or the National Basketball Association, noticed that he was good at the sport. However, it still doesn't talk about his shooting skills. I don't walk away from this piece of evidence believing that he's the greatest shooter around right now. This evidence is still not relevant enough. The last piece of evidence says, Curry earned a career high score of 54 points and set a record for the most three-point shots ever in a game. Finally, the piece of evidence is about Steph Curry and talks about his shooting skills. We know that he earned a high score of 54 points in one game and also set a record for the most three-point shots ever, meaning he's better than other people who are currently playing. Evidence number 3 is the most relevant.
As for practice, you can use the distinguishing fact relevant and irrelevant information in familiar context.